Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about why good form matters and why the reasons it matters are probably different from what a lot of you have been taught. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. Now, a lot of us out here, we talk about good form, proper form, using correct technique, all this stuff. This is stuff we talk about a lot. But here's the thing. How many guys out there are really massive and really jacked who use piss poor form? Not just bad form, but cringeworthy form. It's a lot of them. It's a lot of them. And that's kind of the interesting thing, isn't it? Because you see a lot of guys who use terrible form who are still pretty jacked. In some cases, guys who use form that is horrific who are top level bodybuilders. How about winning Mr. Olympia level bodybuilders? Yeah, see it all the time. You even see it in natty dudes too, who are just genetically gifted. Because at the end of the day, people need to realize gains are really just about tension and work. That's it. Do you really think your muscles care if you used good form or not? You think a muscle really cares if you isolated it or not? No. You hear people say that all the time. They're like, well, you got to isolate a muscle and squeeze and contract it. Show me one study that's ever showed that helped muscle growth. Show me one study. Okay, you need several because you don't ever prove anything with one study. Go look at the sum of studies. When you look at studies on muscle growth where they do muscle biopsies and MRIs and DEXA scans, you really see studies that show that carefully isolating a muscle ever produces better muscle growth than just doing a big compound movement. In other words, that doing a strict concentration curl or a machine curl gives better bicep growth than a lat pull down or a chin up. The studies show this? No. So what world do you live in where you think isolating a muscle improves growth? It doesn't. There's no reason to think it does. There's no evidence at all. No evidence at all. But there's joint angle specificity. There's strength that carries over to joint angle specificity. There's injury prevention. Because you know what? Who's more likely to tear a bicep? Guy who does heavy cheek curls or guy who does strict curls? Guy who does strict curls, he's less likely to tear a bicep. He's also more likely to be strong at the bottom because he doesn't cheat and swing and use the eccentric load. Because you know what? A cheating curl will put just as much size on your bicep. Why wouldn't it? Because if you use hip and glute and lower back to help lift the weight, but you still contract the bicep and the rest just lets you use a 80-pound dumbbell instead of a 40, is your bicep still taking 40 pounds of the load? Probably. What about the eccentric part? Yeah, we know eccentric loading affects muscle growth. You're taking a heavier eccentric sometimes. Is it really going to produce less muscle growth in the bicep? No, of course it's not. If the bicep still is the limiting factor on the final rep and you reach the same level of metabolic fatigue, you still fatigued the bicep. You still stimulated it. Still stimulated it. Isolating it doesn't matter. It's just about fatigue ultimately. But what does happen? Well, you don't always work the muscle through the full range of motion. Can that contribute to being weaker at the bottom? Yeah. Does that mean you might be more likely to tear a bicep when you pull a heavy deadlift? I mean, you might be more likely to tear a bicep when you have to grapple someone or pull something off the ground in an emergency? Yeah, it does increase the chances of that. So using good form allows you to use sometimes a better range of motion. Now, can that improved range of motion sometimes add a little bit of muscle growth? Of course it can, because it gives you access to a few more muscle fibers that maybe don't get worked right in the middle or the top or whatever. So by doing stricter form, you sometimes work a muscle itself through the longer range of motion, and in some cases that can produce a little bit more muscle growth. But what it does do is make it safer. It produces more safety. You're less likely to get hurt. And it also carries over to strength, particularly if you want to get stronger on a lift. You better know how to train the weakest part of that lift, and that usually requires a little tighter form, a little prettier form. That varies from exercise to exercise, but more often than not, that is the case. So there's an injury prevention component, but it doesn't affect your muscle growth unless your form is so bad that you partially remove the primary mover from the exercise. For example, the bench press, if you bounce it off your chest, the chest usually is a little more dominant at the bottom of the bench press. Guys who can't grow big pecs off of a bench press, it's usually because they're bouncing it off the bottom. They're not pulling their scapula in tight, so there's a form issue there. but the other muscles still grow, and sometimes guys still grow a big chest doing that. They still end up with big triceps, big delts. They're still getting muscle growth from bad form. Same thing on a barbell row. You can cheat and swing and everything else. Do your lats not work just because you cheated? In other words, if you can only do a really strict Pendlay row with 225 for 8 reps, but you can do cheat reps with 315, your lats and biceps work any less? Your forearms working any less? Probably not. You're just throwing in some extra hip work and everything else. Now, the injury prevention is one aspect of it, but the other thing we come to is consistency. That's the other thing also. Cheating reps and sloppy form do not allow you to track overload as well, because in other words, you can't control the amount of cheating. In other words, when you swing on a bicep curl, or you swing to help jerk the weight off the floor on a row, or you don't come all the way down and you use a little bit of body English to lift yourself on a weighted pull-up, what happens? Do you use the exact same amount of cheating and momentum on every rep? Does the range of motion vary a little from rep to rep? It might. So you don't always know when you added reps or added weight if the muscles did more work or not. You can assume they did, but you can't track it easily. It's much harder to program it. So strict form allows for more consistent overloading. It allows for more consistent range of motion. So it allows you to program stuff a little bit better. In other words, you're also, because you can program a little bit tighter, you can also avoid plateaus a little easier. Does that matter? Yeah, it matters in the grand scheme of things. That could matter over the course of a year or two. It could matter, and it does matter. But is that going to stop a person from making gains? Probably not, because they're still training hard. If you're still training hard and you're still stimulating muscles, you're fatiguing muscles, and you are creating progressive overload, you're recovering, getting food, getting sleep, all these things, you're still going to grow no matter what. You may not get ideal muscle growth, but you're still going to grow. And people need to remember that. So when we're talking about things like this, they need to understand strict form isn't a requirement for growth. It makes things a little safer. It makes programming a little easier. It can help you break through plateaus easier because you can program around these things and periodize and adjust your training better because you can track it more closely, because you can control the amount of overload more. But it's not going to stop you from making muscle growth. And the problem with this is that people will see lots of guys out there who got results. In some cases, they got really good results. In some cases, they got mind-boggling results while using really sloppy form. And that will sometimes give the impression, well, if they did it and they got amazing results, it must be because of what they did. And the problem with that is that's not always true. Sometimes it's in spite of what they did. And that's the thing. When it comes to training, and particularly training for people who have got pretty good genetics, particularly when drugs get involved with good genetics, you get a lot of wiggle room. In other words, it will allow you to get a lot of things wrong. In fact, even for the genetically average person who's natural, if they train hard enough and they rest hard enough, they have wiggle room. You don't have to do everything perfect to get good results. You don't. You don't. Doing everything as close to perfect as possible will give you a little better results. But it's not necessary to get good results. But that's the problem, is that because there are people out there who, let's say they get 80% of it right, 80% of what they do is really smart, well done, and 20% is just kind of dumb, goofing off, mistakes. But they do it really hard for 7 or 8 years. They train really hard. They got pretty decent genetics. They're still going to get impressive results. And the problem there is that it will give the impression to everyone looking that they must be doing everything right. Because how could they have gotten great results if they weren't doing everything right? So then people will imitate that and just assume that everything they're doing must be right, or they wouldn't have got those results. But that's not always the case. They got enough stuff right, and they trained hard enough, and they ate enough food, and they got enough rest, and they did it for enough years, they got good results. And maybe they got great results. Doesn't mean what they did is perfect, and it doesn't mean it was the fastest way to get there. Meaning, had they been a little smarter with it, they might have got with the results in 6 years instead of 8. It might have taken them 2 less years to reach where they were. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. Depends on how much difference it makes. And that's the thing that you've got to remember at the end of the day. Using good form doesn't actually guarantee you're going to get better results. It doesn't guarantee it at all. All it does is allow you to program a little tighter, and in some cases get a little better results because you can program a little better. Sometimes you get a little extra work through the terminal into the range of motion a little more. So you can reach a few muscle fibers you maybe didn't reach otherwise. And it cuts your chances down of getting hurt. But it doesn't actually guarantee you're going to get better results. So when you see someone using sloppy form and they're not making progress, it's very probably not just because of their bad form. All right, because plenty of guys get good results with bad form. They probably have other things going on. And if the only thing they fix is cleaning up their form, and that's the only change they make, it's probably not going to make that much difference. They probably have other things going on also that need to be sorted out. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.